Combat in Minecraft is simple. It's straightforward, linear, and more often than not, boring. Mobs are limited to slowly walking towards you and in a straight line. You can outrange them with very little effort, or none at all. Most enemies in the game struggle to even get a single hit in. The ones that can have little to no counterplay. Except, of course, for cheesing them so hard they become one of the mobs that can't get a hit in. But despite all these things, combat in Minecraft isn't actually bad. Simple combat fits a game like Minecraft. So then what's the problem? What makes video games fun and interactive is the player's ability to influence the game in meaningful ways. This usually takes the form of narrative and gameplay decisions and/or skill checks. Minecraft doesn't really have a narrative or any kind of skill checks, so here are some examples from other games.
Yes! Fire and everything!
In terms of combat, we can say that a combat system is skill expressive if a lot of these decisions and skill checks happen during the actual combat. Think of fighting games like Tekken. If you lose a fight, it's because the opponent was more skilled and you got strictly outplayed. All of the player's influence on combat happens during the fight. On the other hand, in a turn-based game like Bravely Default, a combat encounter is mainly determined by the character's stats, items, and abilities. Winning or losing depends on if you went into the encounter with a good strategy and setup. These types of combat systems are non-skill expressive, because the player's important decisions happen before combat. An easy way to tell if a game's combat is skill-based or not is to ask the following question. What matters more, how good the player is, or how strong their character is? Combat effectiveness will be some combination of these two things. To give a simple example, in Skyrim, no amount of being good at the game's mechanics is going to allow me to take on a giant with just an iron sword and some leather armor. In Dark Souls though, you can beat the entire game with no equipment whatsoever, if you're good enough. Not every combat system needs to or should be skill expressive. But if a combat system isn't skill expressive, it isn't inherently fun. There need to be other gameplay elements that give meaning to the combat, or else it becomes more of a stale chore than a fun way for the player to interact with the game. Minecraft has a non-skill expressive combat system, where 99% of fights boil down to a DPS race. You hit me, if you can, now I'll hit you, let's see who dies first. This DPS race style of combat works only if the outcome of combat is not predictable, for the same reason that it isn't very interesting to watch a movie you already know the ending to. This is Minecraft's problem. Equipment is far too simple and linear for any combat in the game to be non-predictable and exciting. There are 6 armor sets in the game, with each being a strict upgrade to the one that comes before it. There are no pros or cons to wearing certain armor sets, you merely pick whichever has the higher number. Weapons follow the same pattern, and enchantments are similarly limited in that they function as strict upgrades to your gear. This system is simple, sure, but engaging, definitely not. When equipment follows a linear progression path like this, a few major problems arise. One is the predictability issue I just mentioned. Another is that getting loot of the same or lower rarity than we already have becomes boring and disappointing. If you already have diamond gear, finding more diamonds means only that you can recreate the exact same equipment that you already have. Finally, and arguably most importantly, equipment doesn't impact the way you approach combat. Getting the next tier of equipment only means that you're more effective at doing the same repetitive thing. Sure, you hit harder and can tank more damage, but at the end of the day, combat with full enchanted netherite is the same as with a wooden sword and leather armor. What I'd like is equipment that shapes the way I play the game. Weapons and armor that are equal in power level to diamond, but vastly different in effect. To give an example, what if a netherite sword had less base damage than a diamond sword, but did double damage to mobs that are on fire? This opens up whole new ways to approach combat. I could shoot mobs with a flame bow before engaging, or my friend could do it. I could carry around a flint and steel to set up defensive terrain and hold down an area. Or I could synergize my netherite sword with a flame aspect enchantment. Obviously, this would need some balancing, but you get the point. I want to make equipment choice relevant to gameplay. That means choosing equipment should be an engaging process. I want the player to always be excited to experiment with new items and playstyles, which would in turn make exploring to find these new items exciting as well. The first step in creating a better equipment system is adding more complexity to damage calculation. Minecraft has one offensive attribute and one defensive attribute. All weapons in Minecraft can only use attack damage as a damaging stat. No matter how many weapons you add to the game, the one with the highest damage in every scenario is always going to be the one with the highest attack damage attribute modifier. So we have a multi-layered problem. Combat by itself is a fine system, but it's held back by lackluster equipment. We can't just add more interesting equipment because the current equipment system is built on a bare-bones damage system. My solution is to improve how damage is calculated, which leads me to the point of the video, the damage rework mod I've been working on. So I want to make Minecraft's damage calculation more nuanced, right? And how I want to do that is add more stats and more variables that go into how your player damage is calculated, I guess. Instead of just, how much damage did the attack do, how much armor do you have, slap them together, boom, get a damage number. Instead, I want there to be more variables at play. What type of attack was it? Was it a slash from a sword, a piercing attack from a spear? Did you fall? Is the attack meant to ignore armor? Was it fire damage? Okay, does my armor deflect more fire damage than normal? That type of thing. I think that's what's really going to make Minecraft combat more interesting, right? As I said earlier, I don't think combat really needs anything more than a DPS race, but to make this DPS race work, we really need something that's going to be more complicated than just attack damage and armor. This mod, it's really going to be a framework for more interesting equipment, so you're not going to see me adding any kind of weapons, swords, magic, whatever with this mod, but I want this to be something other people and myself obviously can add on to make more interesting stuff. And for this mod to be included in mod packs, right, there's obviously going to be some people who don't really care about combat whatsoever, they just want to build, which obviously is perfectly fair. Minecraft is supposed to be about building. I want to make sure that those players can just stick to what they already know in vanilla and be just as effective. So there needs to be a level of simplicity as well. A low skill floor is how you'd put it. And seeing as how it'll be kind of a framework for other mods, we also need to make sure it's going to be really polished and as bug free as possible, because if it bugs out, everything that relies on it is toast, right? And the final thing is I really want it to keep in line with vanilla lore. So for example, a lot of games will have elemental damage and they'll have dark damage, light damage, whatever, right? Those things are good in those games, but in Minecraft, having dark damage doesn't really make sense when there's already wither damage established in the game. So I want to make sure things stay nice and cohesive, I guess you could say. And yeah, if any of that sounds interesting to you, make sure to stay tuned because I'll be uploading devlogs hopefully weekly on the channel.